I wanted to talk about a few different things today. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was, well, I was just on Twitter just a little bit earlier, and I was looking at I just noticed I'd forgotten all about Tulsi Gabbard. So I just wanted to start with talking about Tulsi Gabbard. And the reason is because it was only like 3 or 4 weeks ago that Tulsi Gabbard was saying that there was going to be this massive news story where there was going to be this big coup, right? That the coup that Obama was involved in this coup, and it was going to be one of the biggest stories. And they dumped all these papers. It was like a version of the Epstein files. They just I love how Republicans do that. It's like they just dump a lot of stuff and make it look like it's something when it's just like old stuff that's already been dumped. They did that with the Epstein files when they had those influencers holding those, binders. And in those binders was just old information about the Epstein files. And there is so much of what MAGA does is basically treating their fan base or their cults like they're idiots. Every time I hear someone in the MAGA movement talk, it's like they just disrespect their MAGA cult base more and more. And we saw that with the Epstein files, but also with Tulsi Gabbard, which she just came out with this massive, like, obviously she was trying to like divert attention away from the Epstein files, but that is true, yeah. But one of the interesting things that she wasn't just trying to divert attention from the files, but she used a completely made up story to do it, right? A completely made up story about, Obama was involved in this coup and all this sort of stuff. So I kind of took a bit of a deep dive into like what she was saying, right? And she was literally deliberately lying, right? And again, they get away with this. Thanks, SP, for joining. They get away for this is because, and the reason Tulsi Gabbard got away with just lying, right? Lying so much about, Obama's about to be arrested. And of course, like when Tulsi Gabbard was saying that Obama was involved in this coup, the funniest part is that all of MAGA media, the people on like, the people on Twitter, or the, so the MAGA influencers were like, they were sending around photos of Obama like going to jail. Like there was all this stuff of Obama going to jail and all the, and they were convinced. They were absolutely convinced that Obama was days away from going to jail, right? And here we are like 3 or 4 weeks later. And no one, it's just the story has completely, the story of Obama being going to jail for a attempted coup it's completely like left now. It's no longer it's no longer even a story. And it's just the craziness of America. And I think it's probably one of the reasons why I find American politics so much more interesting than Australian politics, is because this kind of thing in Australia would just be like front page news about how a particular, hi Marnie, nice to see you, Marnie, of someone just lying all the time. But they just do it. So, and it's not just Trump lying. The Tulsi Gabbard thing was an absolute lie. Breaking news: the FBI raided John Bolton's residence. Oh my God, is that true, Linda? John Bolton's residence. Wow. Lies now the native, Alex, the native language. His supporters literally believe anything he says. GM from here in South Carolina. Good morning, Manny. Yeah, wow. I didn't know that about John Bolton. Yes, they raided his, wow. That is incredible. Like this is the thing, right? And obviously, I mean, it's obviously connected. I mean, I don't know what the story's about, right? But my guess would be, yes, it's been reported by New York Post. New York Post. If I wish you would have said New York Times, but I'm sure. Look, I'm sure they wouldn't lie about something like that. Yes, I just heard that. Wow. Well, it's interesting that you said that. It's bullshit, my guess. Yeah, I don't like. Yeah, California. Is there any other news source that's reported this besides the New York Post, like the New York Times or the Washington Post or someone more trustworthy? But I wouldn't like the thing is, also been reported on Substack, CNN. Okay, well, I believe CNN more than New York Post, Washington Post. Okay, well then it must be true. Wow, that's insane. And it's funny because in the last couple of days, because everyone's been talking about Russia and Ukraine, all I've heard in the news, so many times, raw story, all I've heard in the at CNN, MSNBC, and a lot of other places is John Bolton has been going on to give his opinion, right? Raided his house for classified documents like Trump did not have. Oh my God, classified documents? Wow. Okay. And I'm guessing like unlike Trump, if they do find, I believe they did. I don't think he did anything criminal, right? So, right, okay. So, is it like similar to what happened with Joe Biden, where it's retribution? Yeah, where they just found like this is the insane. That is so like this is insane about the whole MAGA movement, right? Is that even if you talk about, let's just say that John Bolton took documents home, right? Um, and obviously Joe Biden took documents home. Mike Pence took documents home, and so did Trump. But the difference is that when Trump did it, he tried to obstruct people from taking the documents away. So, and he hid them and then he tried to have them moved, right? When Joe Biden found documents, he basically just said, look, here are the documents. Here they are. Just please take them. So, yeah, so it's Kash Patel made a tweet about boasting Kash Patel, right? They would do anything, right? It's so he wrote a book about how Trump is corrupt and a Russian asset. Wow. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Well, it doesn't surprise me because, and this is the hypocrisy. Like I was talking about Tulsi Gabbard before, and this is the hypocrisy. Yeah, the same with VP Pence. Yeah, he took documents home. I wonder who they got to sign off on the warrant. Yeah. Well, the thing is Trump probably sold copies to Putin. I bet Bolton didn't. Well, he had some documents, right? So isn't it insane? Like, I don't know all the information, right? But it's insane that like he gets FBI show up at his office, right? Now, what Trump will probably say is, well, the FBI came to my office as well. Obviously, the difference is that the archives had already tried so many times, right, to get those documents back from Trump. So, and Trump always tries to portray like, he was treated differently to how Joe Biden was treated differently. But that's just not true because Joe Biden was treated differently because when he found documents in his garage, he basically gave those documents back straight away. He contacted his lawyers, told his lawyers about the documents, and gave them back. When he cooperated. He 100% cooperated. Yeah, in fact, from what I remember, it was Biden had called his lawyers. So Biden basically called his lawyers, who I think were doing like an audit of his documents, and they found them, and so they volunteered the information. It wasn't actually the archives who actually said that he had it. So he volunteered the information that he had them. With Trump, it was completely different. And of course, Trump is always the martyr. Trump is always like, he always plays the martyr. Like, I don't think there's ever been a bigger victim president than Donald Trump. The Republican Party used to be the party of pick yourself up from your bootstraps, and now it's become the party of the victims. Biden didn't have truckloads of them, no. And even if he did, I think the biggest difference between Pence, Trump and that was the fact that, what if Trump, this is the insanity. He also didn't whine about being entitled to them. Yeah. And Biden doesn't have nefarious plans. No. But the thing is, if the archives had gone to Trump and said, you know what, you have these documents, and all Trump did was go, okay, yeah, we have them. Do you want to come and get them? Whatever they do, the lawyers, all that sort of stuff. If he had done that, right, nothing would have happened to him. But instead, he tried to. What I think. Part of the reason I think he did it. Why he didn't play along, because it suited his story. of being the victim, of being persecuted, politically persecuted, right? I think he wanted to keep that story in the media that, like when the FBI showed up at his house and they took those photos, and then he would post the photos and say, see, they're trying to come after me, Joe Biden's trying to come after me and the government's trying to come after. He's always, and that kind of played into the whole, he's the outsider. So I think he did that on purpose because he thought politically for him, it was going to be a positive because it goes along with the whole, I'm a martyr. If I had to guess, Kash Patel had the FBI raid John Bolton this morning because today's the extended deadline to turn over the Epstein files. All right, my bet. They either blow it and some heavy redacted bullshit that hides, always a distraction. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. I think you're spot on about that. Yeah. Thanks, Marnie. I wouldn't be surprised what the reason is. I think it'll probably be, right. I think it'll probably be he got raided for some documents, right? And then he's obviously gonna just go along with it. Like you remember when James Comey, right? He wrote something like 46, 47 or something. I can't remember. It's like I think it's like an American term, which basically means I recall documents were found in the closet of an office Biden once occupied. Biden cooperated thoroughly. Yeah, incels love it when Donnie whines. Yes, they do, and they do. Hi, Dave from California. Yeah, Antonia, they do. They love having. This is true, Antonia. They love having Trump as like a godlike figure, like a martyr. And they love having it. Like, he's like this person who's because then it fits that whole narrative of the deep state is trying to go after Trump because that was his thing. That was his thing, like that the deep state is going after him. And saying the Bolton rail is now on BBC. Okay, well now it's definitely happening. Trump was part of the Epstein cruelty by supplying girls from Mar-a-Lago. Yeah, he was. And I think it's so weird because Trump spent all last year, 2024, saying the FBI was trying to go after him, the CIA was trying to go after him, right? The documents case, you had the Jack Smith case, right, which was about, trying to overthrow the election. And all this sort of stuff last year, where he basically paid, he was basically crucified. Then you had the assassination attempt was kind of brought into that because, of course, they turned that into like a conspiracy that, that's more proof that they're trying to like go after him. And so now, today is supposed to be released with much media coverage. Yeah. And so I think now I think Trump is trying to say, like, basically the way he's doing it now is he's basically saying, well, look, they came after me, right? This is what he's going to be saying. So now I'm going to go after them, right? And again, it's like, James going after James Comey because he wrote that things with the seashells, right? Which meant like throw someone out. It didn't mean assassinate him. James Comey actually had the FBI ring him, right? They didn't arrest him or anything like that, but they actually called him. Now, that is just insane that Trump had the FBI, and another crazy Friday, yeah. Trump had the FBI ring James Comey, right, and basically tell him, why did you write that? Did you mean anything? But like as if he was like as if he meant anything like that. Yeah. So again, it's just so much of this Trump thing that we see, and like going back to like Tulsi Gabbard, right? I was looking at Tulsi Gabbard the other day, and I was thinking she's doing the whole "I'm okay with Comey gets sent to Guantanamo." Well, the funny thing is about Antonia is that Republicans always try to make it out to be right that James Comey was good friends with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, when in fact that doesn't make any sense, right? Because 1 week out from the election, when it was Hillary in 2016, when it was Hillary Clinton and Trump, he releases he re-releases, reopens the email scandal, right? The email service scandal for Hillary Clinton, right? If and then Hillary's really angry about it. In fact, I think in her book that she wrote, she dedicated like 300 pages to it. That's how upset she was with James Comey for doing that, right? Um, and so a week before the election, he reopens this case about the her email scandal. Like, how is that in any way beneficial to Hillary Clinton? Right? It's definitely not beneficial to Hillary Clinton, and so again, it just the narrative doesn't even make any sense. Right? The last thing you would do is release those documents. Reopen the case. The case about the email case. So you know, and that's the thing. And anybody who criticized Trump, right, back then was considered a never Trumper. And therefore, if you're painted as a never Trump, this is what they do. They'd say, like, Trump is a convicted sex offender and pedo. Yeah. And the thing is that Trump Trump kind of manipulated the media and he manipulated, I think, a lot of the culture in America to make it out that criticizing him was either Trump derangement syndrome, right? Or it's or you're a never Trumper if you're a Republican. Comey tried to rehabilitate himself on Substack recently. He got pooped in by viewers. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like he's not a big like the Liberals don't love James Comey, right? CNN probably loves James Comey. There are people in the sort of establishment media who probably love James Comey, right? But the average person doesn't love James Comey. But and the idea that but at the same time, I know when he wrote that. I know when he wrote that on the seashells. I know he didn't mean what that was saying, right? Yep, they'd call real conservatives rhino, Republicans in name only. Yeah, yeah, exactly, Money, because they do, and they everything, everything that so it's like Trump manipulates these things, right? So any criticism of him is like you're a rhino, you're a never Trumper, right? Um, all these sort of stuff, you got Trump derangement syndrome. So then basically anybody who criticizes him, he basically negates as well, you can't trust that person's opinion because that person is a never Trumper, right? And the funniest one I saw, it's not funny, but it was kind of weird, was Mike Pence. So Mike Pence was pretty like loyal to Trump up until they put a guillotine at the front of the White House of the White House when they were trying to like kill him. So basically, yeah. So when they did that, and then January 6th, and they all showed up, and they were saying "Hang Mike Pence," chanting "Hang Mike Pence." Then Mike Pence was kind of like, "Well, I'm not sure I really like this Trump guy." Then he kind of changed his mood. And then when Mike Pence said that, right, he said, "I didn't like the guillotines at the front." He was upset about the guillotines. Like most people would be upset about a guillotine with their name on it. You know what I mean? It's not generally a positive thing. And and then Trump's like, Trump's back, what Trump says to Pence and all that is, well, look, they were angry because their election was stolen. And so he kind of defends the people. He even called those people like patriots and good people and all that sort of stuff. And there's Mike Pence thinking, what the hell? They were chanting they wanted to hang me. And there's a guillotine at the front and you're sticking up for these people. And that was enough for Mike Pence to sort of go, well, I'm now a never Trumper. But then then it was like after that, the MAGA movement and Trump and all those people around him were like, well, you can't really take that from Pence because he's a never Trumper now. Why is it so easy for Trump to manipulate the public with lies, but the left can't convince the public of the truth? I do think, that analogy, T, where they say it's a lie can go around the world 100 times and it will take, the truth a long time to catch up. I think that's really true. I think it's so much easier to lie these days. I also think lies are easier to say, like it's easier to if you're a liar and you don't care about what you're saying, whether it's true or not, you can be a lot more free in how you talk. Do you know what I mean? And pardon them, yeah, or a cabal of rich billionaires, yeah. So I think it's much easier to be a liar, especially online with social media, where people are basically in sort of echo chambers, and so a lot of those people, who when Trump lies all the time, um, ignorance has yeah. And I think the only way you get right wing media machine so big, yeah, like you've got in America, right? In Australia, I'll just give you a bit of a difference example. It's official New York Times reported it, yeah. I'll give you an example between the media in Australia and America, right? In Australia, Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News, right? He's like horrible person owns Fox News, right? You probably heard his accent. He sounds like me. He's an Australian. Rupert Murdoch is an Australian, right? And he owned, and he still does in Australia, owns most of the newspapers in Australia, right? And he has this news organization called Sky News. It's also in the UK as well, which because he's also in the UK in Australia, right? And Sky News is like our Fox News. The difference is that nobody in Australia watches it. It's like it gets like I think 30 or 40,000 views, right? So it's not watched by a lot of people, right? Sometimes it gets more views when they put it on YouTube and then or TikTok, and then it sort of some of them might go viral. Do you know what I mean? But and it did okay during COVID because they were sort of more conservative. Australia kind of went quite strong with COVID restrictions and all that sort of stuff. So they did a little bit better during that period. But in Australia, cable news doesn't do very well, right? And I think it's because when we look at stuff like Fox News, we probably can see it's just bullshit. Like it to us almost to the point like it's boring. Do you know what I mean? Like having people just I heard Sky News but didn't know much about. Thanks for enlightening me. Yeah, like yeah, he started Sky News, which is in Australia and the UK. He has all the major newspapers in Australia, right? So what used to happen is that in Australia, um, and both of his sons, right, Lachlan Murdoch, who's his main son, right. I actually, when I was in Sydney, I actually was in a bar and I met him one night years ago, back in the '90s, right. I met him in a bar in Sydney, the place called Surrey Hills, and he was much younger back then, and he was basically saying, "Oh, look, I'm here looking." He was looking after one of the newspapers in Sydney that he was looking after at the time, right? And the newspapers always were like tabloid newspapers in Australia. They're all tabloids, right? Like the New York Post, which is also owned by Murdoch, right? And then he owns one particular newspaper called the Australian, which is like probably like your Wall Street Journal, which is more, it's conservative, but it's more like old school conservative. It's not like tabloidy stuff. So we understand Rupert Murdoch, and I guess I understand Rupert Murdoch because he came from here and he started everything in Australia before he exported it to America in the '90s. Right? He did it all here first, in his home country because he's an Aussie, right? And well, he's an Aussie in terms of he was born here and spent most of his life here, but in the '90s he became an American because I think he wanted to. I think there are laws in America about who can own news organizations and all that. So for his businesses, he decided to become an American citizen. But again, so I have to apologize on behalf of Australia for exporting him to your country. So as much as I talk about how crazy America is, I have to admit that one of the craziest people in America was an Australian, Rupert Murdoch. So I do apologize for that one. But he's also doing that in Australia. It's just not as successful in Australia. The other thing is why it's not as successful in Australia is because most people, right, they don't read newspapers anymore, right? So his power came from people reading newspapers because he owned most of the newspapers in Australia, right? And since most people don't read newspapers anymore, he doesn't have the same power as he used to, right? So in the old days, prime ministers, which is like your president, before an election, they would actually go and meet with him and in a way sort of like to sort of, it's a way of, hi, Melissa, nice to see you. Again, Antonio, nice to see you. Hi, Dave. So Rupert Murdoch so these prime ministers in Australia would go and meet, right, Rupert Murdoch, whether he was in America. So they'd fly to the States and meet Rupert Murdoch and basically kiss the ring. It was like they would all do it. They would all kiss the ring to Rupert Murdoch. And that's been happening for decades, right? Because he has so much power in Australia, or he at least used to have a lot more power before social media and a lot of people. So obviously, the good thing about social media, and there are a lot of bad things about social media, but the good thing is that people like Rupert Murdoch, the ex-Aussie, right? We seem to attract the crazy people like so it's like other countries are exporting their worst people to you. Elon Musk from South Africa. I think Peter Thiel is from South Africa as well. There's a whole bunch of them from South Africa who are in the big tech industry. And from us, Elon, we exported Rupert Murdoch to your country. Yeah. But yeah, like, so he doesn't, so I think social media is a good thing because, it, we can get around media companies like Fox News, which I think is fantastic because, he definitely had too much power. And for a long time, conservative governments were in power in Australia. Hi, Melissa. Were in Australia, were in power, and that was because the media landscape in Australia was so conservative. We never had anyone like Trump in power. I don't think Australia. So one of the things that I think people are sometimes think is crazy about Australia, but I actually think is actually a good thing, and it would never happen, and it would actually never happen. Right? Is that in Australia? We have compulsory voting, right? Hi, Kathy, and and compulsory voting is actually not as bad as it sounds. Now, to a lot of libertarians, right, compulsory voting could sound bad. Like when I spoke to Joe Walsh, right, he was like compulsory voting, right? Because he's kind of like libertarian, and I totally get it. I totally understand that because it sounds like you're going to get in big trouble if you don't vote. But the thing that compulsory voting does is, and I think it's a positive thing, I don't think you'll ever have it in America because you have this really strong libertarian thing in America. But it's in Australia, you don't go to jail if you don't vote. It's just a fine. And the fine is like $40. And you can get out of voting by just emailing someone and saying I was sick. And I don't know anybody who's paid the fine. And I know people who haven't voted. But generally, most people will vote, right? So it's not really about forcing people to do something or you're going to get a big fine or trouble because it's so easy to get out of. But what it does is it creates a culture of civic duty, right? Of voting, right? So from an early age, you consider voting a civic duty, right? And you only have to do it once every 3 or 4 years. So it's not, with Trump, they all kissed it, yeah. It's like, so it's not a big deal. And having more people vote is actually, couldn't have foreseen these threats. Yeah. Having people vote the way we do, where you have most people voting, the vast majority of people vote in Australia, takes away the extremes, right? It takes away extremes because in America, right, because so many people don't vote, you have to bring out your base, right? You have to bring out your base to win an election, right? So for Trump, he has to bring out the MAGA base, right? So he has to say things like they're eating cats and dogs and all that to get his base rolled up. So in Australia and a lot of people, some of the people in the middle, like swing voters, in America, I think what sometimes they do is they go, both sides are as bad as each other, right? And then they don't vote, right? In Australia, a lot of those people would vote. And a lot of those people will not vote for the extreme parties, right? They vote for So that's how we have, I think, because of that, because there are so many more people voting, and a lot of that middle people in so the center left or center right or whatever are voting. It stops the extremes from having so much power. We also have preferential voting, which is like what you had in New York with Zoran Mandami, where it's not first across the post, right? So here, okay, yeah, we vote no matter what. I like having that right. We vote, yeah, exactly, yeah, and you know, I I just think that having that culture, right? Having that culture of everyone thinking that voting is a civic duty, right? Instead of like, oh, I don't have to vote and stuff like that. It makes you more informed as well. Because what happens is if because everyone knows they have to vote since from their 18 years of age, that means that schools get involved, right? Um, yeah, and when schools get why couldn't I have been born in Australia? Plus your accent way cooler. Oh my god, no, I cringe when I hear my accent. I like, the funny thing, Marnie, is that if I, because I'm so used to watching American films, right, and in Australia, most of the films are American or streaming services American. If I hear an Aussie accent, I like go, oh, that's weird, even though it's my accent, because I'm not used to hearing Australian accents when I'm watching movies or streaming service. It's a weird thing because I should feel, as an Aussie, if I hear my own accent, I should feel, like, oh wow, that's just, but I'm so used to it. And I think it's probably the same for a lot of other countries who are used to having a lot of American stuff. Um, but yeah, I just think it's nice. It's nice having that sort of that culture, of voting from an early age, because the schools really get involved, right? We love it here. Oh, thank you, Kat. I really appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I don't sound like Steve Irwin, and I don't think I sound like Crocodile Dundee. I don't think I sound like either one of those people. So there are definitely different accents, like a more broad accent, like Steve Irwin or Crocodile Dundee. And it's not because of but it's because of Crocodile Dundee. But I mean, I think I don't know who's more popular. I was thinking about this earlier. Who's more popular in America, Steve Irwin or Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee? I'd have to say, in California, we think we have no accents. Oh wow, Steve Irwin. Okay, yeah, yeah. I would have thought Steve Irwin was more popular because Paul Hogan is more Crocodile Dundee. That's the actor who played um, he actually lives in Paul Hogan, the guy who plays Crocodile Dundee, he actually lives in California. He lives in Los Angeles, and I think he's lived there since the 90s because he married Linda Kozlowski, who was the female character, his love interest, right? So he married the love interest in Crocodile Dundee, the American woman, who was obviously part of the show, and he left his Australian wife for her. And it was big news in Australia. Crikey. Yes. Yeah, crikey. Um, so it was. We were all shocked that Crocodile Dundee, Paul Hogan, and apparently they fell in love during the movie, right? So it was happening during the movie, right? And so we didn't find out till afterwards, and then suddenly he left his wife. He was just like because Paul Hogan, the guy from that, just quickly, he wasn't like a famous actor. He used to work on Sydney Harbour Bridge. So he was one of the people who worked on Sydney Harbour Bridge and painted it. So he would paint the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So he was just like a normal guy who worked on the bridge, had like, painting the bridge, fixing the bridge, right? And then one day he went on like a talent show and he did like a comedy thing. And that's how he became famous, right? So he wasn't even like a proper actor. But yeah, but he left for Kozlowski, and then his wife wrote all these articles saying that she was heartbroken and that she would like how could he fall in love with this American woman? So it was like, and all the tabloid newspapers, the Rupert Murdoch, because Rupert Murdoch owns all our were like, this is what I found quite funny. a lot of the papers, like this is like 1980s, right? So it was a different time, but a lot of the papers were like he was a traitor to his country because he married, like he went for an American woman instead of Australia, which was hilarious. Like I thought that was stupid at the time, right? But Rupert Murdoch, who owns all these newspapers in Australia, tabloid, who were telling those stories, well, he ended up becoming an American citizen. So he ended up becoming a traitor to his country as well. So it was a bit ironic that he did that. Steve Irwin, Melissa, Steve Irwin. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I think I remember when Steve Irwin died. Marnie, Steve Irwin. Wow, it's all Steve Irwin tonight. Is that so? There's no Crocodile Dundee people, not many. Wow, that's a shame. Yeah. Well, Steve Irwin, when I remember where I was in Australia, you have your times that you remember, and I have my times when national tragedies happen in Australia. And that was a national tragedy when we found out that he was a stingray had put their barb right into his heart, and the barb had gone right into the heart. And he was actually filming at the time when it happened, and it killed him, which is highly unusual, right? Because it's almost never heard of a stingray killing someone like that. So it was obviously because he was filming it, and part of a lot of the stuff that he did was when he was filming is get really close to the animals and in some ways antagonize the animals. I'm not saying it's not his fault. When you can jump out of a boat on top of a crocodile, you're pretty damn cool, Alex. Yeah. Yeah, he was pretty good. I mean, because Paul Hogan from Crocodile Dundee, um, is he wasn't like that in real life. Like he was not like a proper actor. So he was a bit tougher than the actual normal actor, but he wasn't like Steve Irwin who basically did that as well. Who who basically lived with those animals. And not far from where I live, about 40 minutes from where I live in Brisbane, there's a place called Australia Zoo. I was obsessed with watching the crocodile hunter. Steve married American woman Terry. Luckily, she moved to Australia and never looked back. Yeah. So this is Marnie. It's funny you said that because if you look, both Steve Irwin, right, and Crocodile Dundee both ended up marrying American women. Traitors to our country. I can't believe it. We are shocked. No, but so yeah, because she married, right? And she's a really nice woman, Terry. And about half an hour from where I live in Brisbane, there's a place called Australia Zoo. So it's basically a zoo, but it's like a private zoo, and it's owned by Terry, by Steve. It was owned by Steve Irwin and his family, right? Bindi, the daughter, right, and their son, and it's now been run by Terry, his wife, and it's not far from here. I've been there a couple of times, and it's a really good zoo. And it's different to like other zoos. They do more stuff like, kangaroos, koalas and all that stuff like that. But yes, Terry's become a big, Terry's always on Australian TV, and she's always trying to like, she's always talking about Steve. And I don't think she's never got into another relationship. Like she's never like moved on. What are we doing? We're gossiping about Australian. That's so sad. Yeah. I know. It is because I thought she would have sort of moved on because I think, when did he die? I think he died in 2005 or 2006. If his last name was Hoagie, we'd be talking about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, it's a sad thing, but but I cried like a baby when he passed. Marnie, that's sad to hear. Yeah, because he was a nice guy. He had a nice family. His children were very young when he passed away. They, you know, I've and now the daughter Bindi, they're both involved in the in running the zoo, Australia Zoo. And you probably see them in American TV. They go over, they appear on a lot of the late shows with Colbert and stuff like that as well. But yeah, I think they were good for Australia. But the only thing is they give Australia, they give America the point of view of that Australia is like this, everything is outdoors. we have all these dangerous animals, right? Um, and there are several live podcasts going on about Bolton Ray. It's a great move to Mars. Yeah. This is more important, Antonia. No, so I'm joking. But yeah, I think I think basically, you know, um, a lot of this, it's painted Australia very differently, and to the way that we sort of are, because most of Australia is actually cities. So Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and most people live in the cities. They don't live in the rural areas, and so it's probably similar to like the way you would paint like someone in Texas, who's like a cowboy. You know what I mean? Like most people in America are not cowboys, right? Epstein, yeah. Um, but yeah, it is a big part of Australia. We do have a lot of deadly animals here, but I've never like experienced like a deadly animal in this country. I've seen kangaroos all the time. I've seen koalas. Koalas aren't dangerous, although they can. They're not as when you hold a koala, right? When you hold a koala, um, they're actually not as soft as what you think they are. They're actually quite hard. Yeah, which is a bit of a disappointment. Like I don't nothing against it, but yeah, the first time I held a koala, I was like expecting them to be really soft, like a teddy bear, and they were just really hard. And I was like, yeah, and that was a because I didn't hold a koala till I was in like my early 30s. So my daughter and I plan to go to Australia in 2026. What news will we deploy today? Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic, Marnie. I think you'd love Australia. Make sure you go to Australia Zoo. It's not far from Brisbane, so you fly into Brisbane, you go there. You'll love it, and usually the family is there. We are fascinated with Australia and love Aussies. Kimmy, thank you. Um, yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and amazing. And like I'm fascinated. The funny thing is, I'm fascinated with America, right? And I think the reason I'm fascinated with America is because in Australia, um, we're kind of like a lot of the states are very similar. Like you don't have accents, right? In America, every state kind of has a different accent. Like if you go to New York, the accent's different to Texas. In Australia, we have our our land base. Yep, you're adorable. You know, thank you. Um, our land base is as big as yours. So we have a really big country in terms of like geography, right? And um, but if you go from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, the accents are exactly the same. There's no real change in accents. So we don't have different accents in Australia like you do in America. Um, Joey's can throw a kickbox. Yeah. Like like kangaroos are pretty tough. Like they like some of them look like they're on steroids, like the big ones, the really muscly ones with steroids. And I've visited friends of mine who have kangaroos near their home, and they literally would knock on the door because they would feed the kangaroos. They'd feed them bread, which I don't think is a good thing though, and they would feed them bread. So they got used to. So what they do is they knock on their door with their heads. So they just hit their heads with the door with their heads, and then they said to me, like, they said, "I'll go answer the door." And so I went answer the door thinking it was going to be a human being. And there was literally a massive kangaroo, right? Huge kangaroo standing there. And there was some bread and he said, just give him some bread. And then I gave him some bread and they just went. So, that kangaroo was taller than me. It was like 6'3", 6'4". So yeah, it's definitely a dangerous can be they can be dangerous if you fight them, but most people don't fight them. I don't think that's a good thing. But yeah, in America you have all these different accents, which is fantastic. Aren't all Australians descended from criminals? If so, Antonia, it's true. We're a penal colony, right? So basically, it's true, Antonia. We come from if I guess Australia is a very multicultural country, so most people now will have parents who come from Europe, from Spain or Asia or China, any of those like nations or anything. So, but the people who've had generations of families who've been here, um, the first people to arrive, the English, was basically prisoners. We were basically a prison colony for England, and that's why I think a lot of Australians have always been quite rebellious, right? Australia's always had a rebellious thing. A lot of our sense of humour is quite rebellious, right? We kind of joke with each other. We take the piss with each other a lot, that sort of thing. We don't take things very seriously. So I think that comes from that background of being like a colony like that. And then what they did, and a lot of the people who came from England to Australia, um, they ended up becoming free after a while. So what they basically said is, generally a lot of the people who came to Australia weren't the worst of the worst, because it looks ridiculous from afar. Yeah, yeah. Well, they must have looked at Australia because they came to Australia first a couple of years earlier before they actually settled here, and they didn't see a lot of the Indigenous people because we had Indigenous people here, but they didn't see them, and they just assumed that the country there wasn't anyone in the country, and they looked around and they thought this is a good country. They thought it was a bad country, like in terms of it was too hot, right? They thought the conditions here would be too hot for people to live, and so they thought let's just bring the prisoners here. And Australia's ended up being a nicer country to live than England in the long run. But yeah, they all came here, and basically they brought the prisoners because they wanted to. Once they decided they wanted to colonize Australia and bring it up, no southern drawl because it looks exactly But once they bring those prisoners of America, they made sure they only brought the ones who stole pieces of bread or some money, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to turn them into free people after a while. So they made them work as basically slaves for 5 years, working on the land, building homes, all that sort of stuff. So basically they had free labor to basically build Australia. And then they would get, after a while, they get pardoned, and then they'd have children, all that sort of stuff. So that's how it happens. So all the people in Australia who come from generations, they're all prisoners, except for the prison guards, obviously, the governors and all that sort of stuff. But they made up probably 10% of Australia's population. So 90% of Australia's population were prisoners. We are criminals, right? We are criminals in this country. And that's probably why Rupert Murdoch came from this country. That kind of makes sense now that Rupert Murdoch was an Australian because he's kind of a criminal. And I do know that Rupert Murdoch family did come to Australia in the first fleet that came here, but he didn't come from prisoners. Actually, he came from more. His dad was like a governor or something. So yeah, so even back then he kind of came from more that sort of area. So yeah, so it's Australia's like being built on prisoners, which is kind of a weird thing, as where I think in America you had, and then I think we had a lot of Europeans who came here, that sort of thing like that. But in Australia, up until the 1960s, right, they had what's called the White Australia policy. So they wouldn't allow anyone from Asia unless they had like special permits to come here. So it was quite a racist country, Australia, for a long time, So yeah, it's got a bit of a never thought about Australian accents being the same. In the UK, they're wildly different, like in the US. Yeah. So I've been to the UK, right? And if you go to London, it's completely different to how it is in Liverpool, right? Or or even the Midlands, Norfolk, any of those places. Blackpool, I've been to Blackpool, all those northern areas, the Northerners, and they sound completely different, So and even like when you think about England, then you have Wales and you've got Scotland and all that, and they're all it's quite geographically, it's quite a small area, as where Australia is a massive area. So you would think that Australia would have many accents throughout the country. Now you have people who sound like they come from rural areas, like the country, like Steve Irwin or Paul Hogan. They're more sort of like they come from more like sort of the outside areas. They sound more broad, but and then you have people who sound more like me, who are kind of more from the city areas, right? So we sort of grew up more in the city areas. Not that I'm scared of kangaroos or anything. I would fight a kangaroo, but I wouldn't want to. I mean, I wouldn't fight a kangaroo, but I've known people who've been attacked by kangaroos, and then they've kind of had to like defend themselves to get out of it, because they can be quite strong. The other animal you have to really worry about in Australia is dingoes, right? So dingoes, you probably remember the movie Evil Angels with Meryl Streep. The Dingoes Got Me Baby. I think I think that was a big film in America, the Meryl Streep one about the dingo and getting the baby. Um, so that is a bit of a dangerous animal as well. Although it's like a small dog, not tiny dog, like a mid dog. They can be very dangerous, especially with kids. They usually go after kids, but you won't find them like in the city areas. They're like more in the rural areas and places like that. So yeah, so it's not you're not so Australia is not as dangerous as a lot of people think it is. It's actually, it's a lot of cities, restaurants, bars, all that sort of stuff. It's quite cosmopolitan in Australia. So yeah, not at all what a lot of people probably think. It's not like Steve Irwin, that sort of, that they would be the minority in the country, right? They'd be the minority in the country. But yeah, so, but I think I'm actually really looking forward to going to America in the next couple of years. I want to go to California. I want to go to Washington, D.C. I want to go to Oregon. I do want to go to Texas as well. So there's all these places that I'd love to visit in America. If I ever get the chance, I'm a bit worried that if I go, that Donald Trump might sort of, um, revoke my visa or something like that. Because but yeah, I don't know. I'd love to do it. I really would love to do it to visit America, because so many beautiful people over there. And that's the thing. Like, as much as I criticize Trump and all that, there's just so many great people that I've talked to over there, and yeah, I think it's a great country overall. And I think you guys might look overseas and see, because of the craziness that's happening in America at the moment. But I think that craziness will hopefully go away and get better. And then, you can go back to being like a normal country again. So I'm hoping that's what happens. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, I mean, the other thing, moving away from Australia and 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 what's happening here. I think the interesting thing about Rupert Murdoch going to America, right, is that when he started Fox, I had no idea about that. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. It's true. Yeah, Kimmy. Yeah. But Rupert Murdoch is kind of like um the kind of person that couldn't make it in Australia. Like, he made it financially in Australia, but he never made it in terms of being as big as he is in America, right? He was a known person in Australia, but he was never like Fox News known, right? And I think part of the reason is because I don't think he could have got the same sort of power here that he had over there. And when he went over there, um, I think he understood something that he learnt in Australia, and that is that in Australia, he used to always say, he used to say this before he went to America, he used to say, there's no news just for conservatives, right? There is not a news organization that just does conservative news, right? And he would say there's a big market for um, for conservative news, not centrist news, not news that looks at both sides, but specifically just news that looks after conservative. He was saying this in Australia before he bought Fox News, right? So he saw in Australia, but I think the reason he couldn't do it here is because, first of all, we have a small population. We only have 27 million people. And back then we probably only had 20 million people. So we don't have enough people enough conservatives, right, to to start a news organization that just goes for conservatives. Because a lot of his stuff in Australia is tabloid stuff, and tabloid stuff can be watched by anybody, right? It's stories about, like, someone was impregnated by an alien. He's do all of those things. Are the Aboriginals treated all right in Australia? Kimmy, I'd say no. I'd say Kimmy, no. It's a long story. The Aboriginal people in Australia, when the English came here, right? Um, they they didn't treat them that well, and I think one of the worst things that happened, right, is that um, because Australia is an island, right? The Aboriginal people are some of the oldest populations of human beings. They've been in Australia for 50,000 years, right? And so when when England came and colonized Australia, they had all these diseases, measles, rubella, all this stuff. But the Aboriginal people, because it was an island, had never experienced those diseases, right? So they weren't used to it. So obviously, if you get, the measles a million times and all that stuff, it's over time your body adjusts to it better than it would if it's a new disease that you've never experienced before, right? So these Indigenous people who'd never experienced all these diseases from Europe were suddenly dying because they had no protection, right? And so many of them died because of disease, right? Um, Other ones were kicked off the land, right? And so there was a combination of different things. There were some English people who thought they were doing the right thing, right? But of course, back then, a lot of people's views in England or America or all that stuff was that black people, including Indigenous people, um, weren't as educated or weren't as that you couldn't educate them to the same level as a white person, right? So that they had a lot of those views that people used to have back then, right? So they were treated like second class citizens, and there were some English people who tried in what their ideas was a good thing. They they brought it. They turned a lot of them, religious. Like they had their own they had their own sort of superstitions that they used to do. We call it a religion, but not really that type of, and they converted them into like Christians. So you had a lot of those Christian monasteries, evangelical Christians who'd come in and suddenly, you had all these Aboriginal groups. Um, they would take a lot of their children away because they thought that the parents weren't treating them right, right? And then they'd bring them up in a white family. So, so I think like any other country that has experienced colonizing, like maybe America with the Indian, the Indian people that you have there. It's similar to like that. I think from what I've heard, that yeah. So I would say today, wow, that's so interesting, incredible. Yeah, I would say today that Indigenous people are definitely treated a lot better than they were back then. But Indigenous, to think about this, when England came here, colonized Australia, and before they arrived, Aboriginals made up 100% of Australia's population. Now they make up about 2% of Australia's population. So they're like the very small minority group, right? And and so they don't have a lot of power because of that, right? And there is a lot of stuff in Australia which I think overlaps with what happens in America in terms of Indigenous people and maybe you know African American people you have in America, things like that, where there's this right wing thing. Okay, more info to come. Breaking source says the Bolton FBI raid has done his investigation that was reopened with the Trump administration, having to do with the book Bolton wrote. So it's got to do with his book. That's weird. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that later. But yeah, look, that's weird. Yeah. But yeah, I think a lot of the Indigenous people are I, they're, they're treated a lot better than they were back then. A lot of the damage was already done. A lot of their culture is not the same anymore. You know what I mean? There's very few Aboriginal people who now live in their own communities, right? There's still a few that live in the communities, but most of them don't. They live now in the cities. Um, um, I, a lot of them have had problems with drinking, alcohol, that sort of stuff, drugs, that sort of stuff, because they've been displaced throughout all the years, right? Because up until like the 70s or 80s, they were treated like a second class citizen. They could only vote. I think started voting in the 60s. Before then, they weren't allowed to vote, even though it was their country. It's interesting when I hear people in Australia, right? People in Australia will say, because we're in Asia, that a lot of the racism is towards Asian people. So people from China or most people in Australia, so a lot of the racism is because you see, because we're close by, a lot of the new immigrants that come here come from Asia. It's also you can if someone comes from England, it's harder to identify that person because they just look like they look like a lot of other Australians. So you see extra people come from Asia, everyone's like, oh, there's lots of it, just from a purely identical, people can identify it easier, and then they will basically, but they will say, oh, look, go back to your own country or whatever. Not most Australians don't do that, but some, like a small percentage. And then I think, well, you also didn't come, you're not like the indigenous people in this country. You also came from somewhere else, right? So there's this hypocrisy about, kicking Asian people, Asian people shouldn't come here. But at the same, is there much sexism in Australia? None at all. None at all. No, I'm joking. There is some sexism in Australia. Could I say sexism? I don't think so, Kimmy. I don't think there'd be much difference between the sexism in Australia and America. I don't think there'd be much difference. Yeah. So I think there's definitely sexism like any other. I don't think there's any country on the planet that doesn't have sexism. But we do take it pretty seriously, right? Like we do take it pretty seriously. Like you can't, all the laws are there to protect, you can't fire someone because they're a woman. You can't anything like that. So I think the sexism in Australia would be more amongst older people who sort of grew up, in the 60s or the 50s when times were a little bit different, you know what I mean? And sometimes like, I don't know if you'd find it offensive, but sometimes some younger people here would find it offensive when an older Australian goes, "How you going, love? How are you, love?" And they say "love" all the time. Like so they go, "Hey, love. Hi, darling. How are you, love?" And they don't really know the person. It's just like a stranger. It's like an older man, and they're not hitting on them. It's just a little bit, I guess, you know, degrading. I guess in some ways, like I know women who that doesn't bother. Like they just think it's adorable. They think it's nice. But some people do. Some people are like, "Oh, don't call me darling," don't call me don't call me love like that. You don't do that to a guy. But yeah, so I guess it's different with different people. But I don't think the sexism here is any worse than anywhere else. Um, I think I think racism probably spiders, no spiders. I think the Dingo movie was called A Cry in the Dark. Melissa, that's interesting. It was called A Cry in the Dark in America, but in Australia, it was called Evil Angels. So they named it differently in different countries. Yes, it was a big movie. People said the dingo got me baby for years. The dingo's got me baby. Yeah. Yeah. It was a big thing. I remember Seinfeld. There was like an episode of Seinfeld where like Elaine said, the dingo's got me baby. But it's nothing to laugh about. No, but it is a horrible story that and it's probably Australia's biggest story is that one. I think in terms of true crime, it's probably Australia's biggest story, and it was an interesting story because it exposed the media, right? So what they did what's called an inquiry. So eventually she was pardoned, right? But she did go to jail, right? She went to jail. She was convicted, but it was basically the reason it was such a big story. Besides, the fact that it was like a dingo, and she was there with her husband in this country town, right? And she's basically they're in a tent together. Her and her husband they're in their 20s. They're quite like a young couple, right? A young couple, right? And it's at night time. I don't know if you know a place called Uluru. It's in the middle of Australia. There's a big rock. It's called Uluru Rock. It's like a massive rock. It's where a lot of Indigenous people live. And so they were there visiting from New Zealand because they were actually Kiwis from New Zealand. And they were in their tent. And then the mother got out and she said, and she's basically said, "Oh my god, the dingo's got me baby, the dingo's got me baby," and then like in the 10th place, she was just screaming it, and you know they didn't see the dingo. Nobody saw the dingo, and nobody saw the baby. Um, and Western North Carolina is beautiful, Blue Ridge. Please visit Philadelphia. Yeah, I'd love to visit Philadelphia. I would love to. Yeah, don't don't forget to visit Alligator Alcatraz. Yeah, be careful if you come here, Joe. Nothing bad can happen to you, please. Oh yeah. I think I'd be okay because I'm used to a lot of MAGA people on Twitter, so I think I'll be okay. And also, I'm an Aussie, so I can handle MAGA. But yeah, so I think I think going back to the dingoes got Joe. It's an embarrassing place to be right now. Well, Alex, I would say it is an embarrassing place to be right now. Yeah, but I reckon I want to be normal again. Yeah, I get that. I get that. Because, you know, I kind of feel like it's easy for me as an Australian to look at what's happening in America and be horrified, right? But then I can just go outside my home and I'm not in America, right? So in a way, it's easy for me because, you know, I don't, I don't, I can be horrified from it, but I'm horrified from it from far away. As where for you guys, you're living inside the nightmare. So I totally get that it's way worse for you guys than it is for other people. Even though like Trump does affect other countries with tariffs and stuff like that. Um, but I just I really feel bad for a lot of the Americans out there, because you never asked for this, you never voted for this, and, you know, from what I remember, 30% of Americans, eligible voters, voted for Trump, which is it's not a big percentage, right? So most people didn't vote for him. And yet you have to put up with him, not just for 4 years, but for like 8 years or beyond. Although I don't think he's that healthy. So I don't know if he's going to be around for that much longer. He doesn't look that healthy. So I totally get it. My husband from Philly, Melissa, I love Philadelphia. Oh yeah, yeah, um, yeah. I think Philadelphia would be a lovely place to visit. I'm trying to think. Philadelphia, like, is there a Philadelphia cheese? Like, I'm pretty sure I've eaten Philadelphia cheese in Australia. I think we have that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's something else, but I'm pretty sure I've eaten Philadelphia cheese. Yeah. Melissa, is that true? Or am I just making that up? Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, look, I totally get it, guys. Like I'm I'm really hoping that I'm really hoping that Trump in the next before the midterms gets kicked out. I love that money. Yeah, yeah. In the midterms gets kicked out, right? And then he becomes like a lame duck president, right? He's no longer a proper president. He's lame duck. He can't change anything anymore. Come to Chicago, but not in the winter or midsummer. We have a really cool governor, Pritzker, who takes no crap from Trump. Yeah, okay, Chicago. I've always liked the idea of Chicago. Actually, I used to when I was younger and I got into American basketball. I used to follow Chicago Bulls because of Michael Jordan, of course. So, but yeah, that sounds cool. All right, yeah, definitely do that. If you come to Australia, you guys, you definitely have to visit Brisbane, where I live, because it's one of like you have Sydney's like the main city, right? And then Melbourne, which is I'm from Sydney, so I spent most of my life in Sydney, and but I moved here 10 years ago. But Melbourne, they get most of the people go there, but a lot of people will sort of skip Brisbane. But it's actually quite a nice city. It's a little bit smaller, but it's still a good city. It's and it's right near the water, so you got the water there. You got beaches, really cool beaches here. We've got lovely beaches, and growing up near beaches, it's such a great thing. But yeah, going back to my poor American friends, I really do hope that the best case scenario is that Trump gets kicked out, right? In during the midterms. What I mean kicked out, I don't mean like he gets kicked out, but he loses his power, right? And then becomes a lame duck president. And then probably I think what's going to happen is either JD Vance or maybe someone like from outside, like Tucker Carlson, might join in as like a third side of it. I don't know. I but I do feel so bad for what is happening over there, and all I can say is that I know a lot of people in Australia feel really bad for America. And the thing is I don't want you guys to think is that people in Australia or even people in Europe or Scandinavia are thinking that just because he got voted in, that that means all Americans are MAGA people. They don't think that at all. You know, we know the fact that there are so many people. We see all the demonstrations on TV. We see all the people fighting, Trump. We see Gavin Newsom, trolling him, all this sort of stuff. We see that, so we know it's not everyone in America is a Trump supporter, or it's because of them. We know it's a very different sort of um, situation out there, and it's a horrible thing because it's one thing to get voted in once, right? But to get voted in twice is like just insane. Like you thought that I don't know how people thought after 4 years that they were thinking, you know what, let's do that again. Um, I understand why they did it, inflation and all that sort of stuff, but the short term memory thing, or people not really engaging with politics, and then sort of not understanding not being informed about what's happening in the countries, it's a real worry. It's a real worry because it makes me think that someone else could take advantage of that. So same as what happened in the Americas. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's a tough one. I really hope that things get better in America. I have been enjoying the Gavin Newsom thing though. I've got to say the trolling from Gavin Newsom has been like, I know it's his social media team. I know it's not coming from Gav. I know he's not there like posting himself, but um, yeah, lovely missionaries. Okay. But yeah, a lot of those, a lot of those tweets were amazing. What I love about it is it was so MAGA not to get the joke. Do you know what I mean? Like it was so MAGA for the joke to just go above their head. You know, um, it was exactly. Yeah, it was like when they like Fox News is going crazy and people on Twitter and they're all like, oh, Gavin Newsom's becoming, he's becoming immature. He's this, and it's like there's no self awareness at all within the MAGA movement. Like they have no self awareness at all, right? Um, that you can basically troll people like this, um, and then they have no idea that they're the butt of a joke or that Trump is the butt of a joke, right? Um, it's just like, how do they not see it, right? And my favorite was, I think her name was Dana Perino from Fox News, who said that that Gavin Newsom should not be doing this because he's the governor, and if he wants to become president one day, he's never going to become president by tweeting like this. Like, yes, that's like, yeah. So, um, you know, I do find it. This is the thing why I find American politics more interesting than Australian because, like, it just like that wouldn't happen in Australia, right? You wouldn't get someone being trolled like that. Like the idea that someone would tweet like the way Donald Trump does is just insane. Like our leaders in Australia, it's the most boring tweets you've ever read in your life. Like it's literally like I'm showing up at a hospital today, where we've got a new MRI machine that's coming to the hospital, and yeah, and we'd like to thank this company for donating the money for this new MRI machine. Like that's it. Like that's the tweets in Australia. We have a new policy that's come up. Not not you're a your new scum or some, Sleepy Joe or, little Marco Rubio, like all the nicknames. Like, how is it possible that a president could be acting like a 14-year-old troll online? Is just like, it is kind of like sad, but yeah, but it's also because, like, I live in both worlds. I live in the American world, but I live in the Australian world. So when I look at what's happening in America, and then I switch off and watch Australian stuff, it's like it couldn't be further apart. You know what I mean? And it makes it even more sort of like uh, terrible to watch, but also like a car wreck. You know what I mean? Because I'm I'm spending half my day watching Australian politicians just act like normal people, and then I'll put on Twitter, and then suddenly it's like Donald Trump is like calling someone a retard or something. You know what I mean? Like it's just insane. Like he can just talk like that. And now everyone is so immunized by it because we've been hearing it for so long that it's no longer even like a big deal anymore, right? He just he's normalized like the crazy stuff, right? And 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 that's really sad in some ways, that that's the normalization, because I guess the good thing is that someone like Zoran Mandami has found a way, whether you agree with his politics or not, he's found a way to do well on social media without saying all the crazy stuff that Trump does. Because for a while there, I was thinking, because as we all know, getting attention these days is almost impossible, right? So sometimes you have to say insane things to get attention. And since Zoran Mandani was able to do that without saying all the stuff that Trump did, so that was kind of like, for me, that was kind of like a positive. I was like, okay, well, Democrats can do it without the crazy stuff, right? They can do it with just, you know, talking about cost of living, or, having someone who's charismatic and things like that, because our leaders aren't that charismatic. Like, I'm not saying they aren't not charismatic, but like they're pretty sort of bland in some ways, and as compared to what you get in America. But again, I think it's also because in America you have like a Republican system, and we have like a Westminster system, right? So people in Australia or in England in the Westminster, it's called the Westminster system, we don't vote the exact way you guys do, in sense of that you don't vote for you don't vote for the leader. You do vote for the leader, but you vote for the party, right? So when you go and vote, that you're voting for either the left wing party or the right wing party, right? And and obviously you know who the leader is, so you will take that into consideration. But if that political party decides that that leader is not suitable to run their party more, they can actually get rid of that leader. They could, and they don't need to go to the people and get rid of it, because you're voting for the party, not the person, right? Not the leader of that person, right? So it's a little bit different, and because of that, you don't have this sort of cult of personality that you have in America or in other countries, right? Where it's all about, he's like a reality TV star. You even had it a little bit with Barack Obama, but not in the same way, where he was like a bit of a star. Do you know what I mean? Like he was a bit of a TV. He was very good on TV. He knew how to talk and things like that. And that's because people are sort of voting for him. He's in America, as I said before, you don't have compulsory voting, which means you have to get your base out. So it's better to be charismatic to get your base out. As we're in Australia, you know, most people are going to go vote, right? And the good thing about preferential voting, which I think is a good thing, which I think America should get, in my opinion, which is what they had in New York, is that if you look at what happened in Pennsylvania with the whole Israel Gaza thing, where you had people in Dearborn who were basically didn't like what Joe Biden supporting Israel, right? And so as a protest, they voted for a Greens person, right? Jill Stein, right? It was a protest vote against her, right? Now, we have the Greens Party in Australia as well, and they run elections, right? But in Australia, what would happen is the Greens Party can decide to give, if they don't win, they can give their votes to someone else, and so they can say, okay, if we don't win, your votes will go to the Democratic Party, right? As a second thing, right? As a second thing. So you don't waste your vote. You're not wasting your vote. Your first preference is the Greens, but if they don't win, you give it to the Democrats. So but in the way it works in America, because you don't have preferential voting, in a way, it's a wasted vote to some degree, right? It's a protest vote. It's a wasted vote. In Australia, if it goes to the Greens, right, it will come back to this, usually comes back to the other centre-left party, right? So your vote isn't wasted, right? And I think that's a better thing for people, because people can still vote for a different party, right? But that particular party, can decide their preferences. And also, when you go into the voting booth, you can decide to vote however you want. You could put, for example, Democrat. You could put Greens 1 because you're not happy with what Joe Biden's doing. You could put Libertarian 2, and you can put Democrats 3. You can decide in what order they do. They will generally have how to vote cards, which is they'll give you what they want you to do. Like, you don't have to do it, and they'll say, vote us first, vote Democrats second. So you put 1, 2, 3, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Americans think of that, but in my opinion, I think that's like a good idea. Yeah, to do it that way. Anyway, I don't know what you're seeing, but right now, it's kind of like my screen is kind of frozen. So I don't even know if anyone can hear me anymore or what's going on. I'm just like literally frozen on my screen with my hands up like this, like Han Solo in in Star Wars. Like, it's just literally that's all I've been able to see for the last 10 minutes. So I'm not even sure if anyone's still there. But but anyway, it is 12:06 a.m. So I probably should go to bed soon. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I really enjoyed it. I was going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff, but I got stuck talking about Australia stuff. If you wrote on the chat and I haven't responded, it's probably because the screen is frozen. And the last chat I can see is from Marnie saying exactly same thing. I haven't got anything after that. So yeah, I think it might be my internet or whatever, but it's a bit slow at the moment. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much, Marnie, Antonio, Melissa, Lee, T, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a good night from Australia. Love from Australia. See ya. Bye.